What's one leadership lesson you've learned about adapting new technologies in complex or heavily regulated environments?
Having done all of those things, regardless of how heavy the regulation, regardless of how complex or advanced or brand new the technology is, the human beings are always the hardest bit. And I always say this to my clients and remind my team of this all the time, that the change management work that you're about to undergo to get people aware of the change that you're doing, bought into the vision of the change, so that they're on the side and they understand why they're doing it, and then equipping them with the right knowledge they need to transition and the right support and training they need to move across to whatever new technology you're implementing, be it AI or a different type of data or whatever it might be. Supporting the human beings, or the humans in the loop, as they're now called, along the way, and making sure that transition is done thoughtfully with enough time planned in for the human elements of it to adjust are critical.
By the end of this episode, you'll know how leading companies are extracting hidden value from the data they already own, why data is reshaping valuations, and how smart leaders are separating noise from insight. Welcome back to the Enhance AI Partners podcast, the show where we explore how leaders are scaling in fast-changing industries through people, process, and pragmatic AI. I'm Yohan Mejia, founder of Enhance AI Partners. We help fintech and SaaS teams scale smarter with AI-powered outbound content and workflow automation, so you grow faster without adding any headcount. This show is an extension of that mission, spotlighting innovators who are changing the way complex sectors evolve. Today's episode is called Data as the New Differentiator, How Smart Companies Build Value from What They Already Have. My guest today is Graeme Crawford, CEO and founder of Crawford McMillan, a firm advising on data strategy, technology, and investment. Graeme has been a strong voice on how data underpins AI, how it drives company valuations during acquisitions, and why many fears around AI adoption are misplaced. Graeme and his team have been strengthening their position as trusted advisors by helping enterprises rethink their data assets not as costs, but as growth multipliers. And they've been recognized for reshaping how data impacts valuations in M&A deals. Graeme, welcome, and I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
We'll go ahead and get started with the first segment. Graeme, you've said data is the real differentiator in AI. Why do so many companies miss the value in the data they already have?
Yeah, it's their biggest competitive advantage. So data that they have about their customers or about their space is their biggest competitive advantage. And when we think about competition in business, you have to, from a data perspective, it's about having data that your competitors don't have. And if I start from a standard use case of company A and company B, and they both log into ChatGPT and start asking it questions about their industry or about their customers, they'll get the same answers because it's based on GPT's knowledge base of everything that's been written on the internet forever, right? And GPT is a very effective predictive model, which will predict the answers, the correct answer that the humans should get. It will be broad, it'll be ambiguous, and it won't be super actionable. So the way to turn that into a competitive advantage and to change the game for you and your company is to bring your own data to the party and instead focus and drive the power and amazing capacity of AI towards that first party data that you have, that's your competitive advantage. And there are lots of ways that people can collect this, right? So they can collect this from their website in terms of how customers interact with them. They can collect this, if used appropriately and within the guardrails that they've agreed, data from their clients. They understand what works, what doesn't work, et cetera. They have their own custom models that are theirs to use. So, for example, we have a data maturity model that we've built as a company to assess the different maturity levels of companies. So, rather than spamming into the world of public open Claude or GPT, if instead you can create a closed environment and use the unique data that you've got that other people don't have, then that's a real competitive advantage for your company.
And you mentioned two key words here. You said unique which is what I think personally, and I think you mentioned it during your answer. ChatGPT can't produce unique answers unless you give it unique data points or unique points of view, etc. So I think that's a very important key part that you mentioned during your answer,
Yeah,
being able
absolutely.
to make it so it's an answer that works for me specifically and not for everyone.
And the opposite is true as well. And this is the other risk that I see companies run into when they're using
Mm-hmm.
AI. They get their own data, their first party unique data, the approach that I just prescribed there. But if that data is not well governed, is not well managed, the quality of it is not assessed and audited correctly, it could be misleading. You're then making giant leaps of assumption that whatever AI model you're using can correctly interpret that data, can correctly fix errors in that data, and can correctly understand the full business context and metadata about that data before it gives you an answer. It is not going to come back and ask you for that stuff if you don't provide it. What instead it is going to do is predict the correct answer based on the poor quality and or incomplete data that it's dealing with, and then you run into the risk of it giving you an answer that is actually completely incorrect for the right way to proceed.
100%. And I mean, I think our listeners will appreciate that, those two specific points of view. Because, yeah, it's not the same as, giving it accurate data than giving it the wrong data piece for the wrong prompt and just getting something that's completely useless. And we still use it because we think, AI will do the trick and give us something that's useful for us.
Yeah,
And
garbage in, garbage out has always been a phrase that existed in the data industry and the
100%.
technology industry in general. And AI doesn't change that. It's not the magical flux capacitor from Back to the Future 2 that takes your trash and turns it into time travel.
And if you had to explain it simply to a first-time founder, what's the first step to unlock value from what they already have from that existing data?
So first, recognizing what you have. Too often people throw away things which could potentially be useful in the future. They have an opportunity to create long-term records of all of their customer interactions, everything that's happening, and store that in some central place so that they can use it and observe patterns over time. It's easy in the early stages of building a company to get caught up in the operations, to get caught up in growing revenue, to get caught up in increasing profitability, growing lifetime value from customers, all critically important things for a company's success. But if you do that and you're always in the moment and you're not thinking about how the patterns might be changing over time or how things might be shifting, it's very easy for companies to treat that data as throwaway or to have a database that they keep up to date. Even if they put great effort into keep it up to date, if there's no historical record of that database, suddenly you're 10 years down the line and you start to look at lifetime value of a customer and you realize you only have 1 year of customer records, then that's going to be very hard to compute. You can calculate lifetime value over the last year, but you don't have the full lifetime of that customer, just as one example. So thinking about the right way to store and govern that data, thinking about the right way to protect it as well. Again, I see many early stage companies who, in the process of growing, this is sometimes a necessary evil. They have a database or oftentimes an Excel spreadsheet or a Google sheet with critical company information on it and critical client information on it that everybody has edit access to. And even that from a base level amount of governance, when anyone can change it, then you've got a big data. You have a big data governance risk that could have impacts further down the line. And a question I always ask when I see these critical Excel spreadsheets and critical Google Sheets in play is, what would happen if somebody deleted this? And so as a first-time founder, that's a really good sense check. That's a really good validation check to bring to the party yourself and challenge yourself with. What would happen if somebody deleted this? And that often proves instructive to the type of care that people should be taking over just even their data existing to start with. I'm not one to sit here and advocate for enterprise grade data governance platforms for brand new startup companies. It doesn't make sense as an investment, but you can, in those early stages, prepare yourself for a future where that data you're collecting now becomes really valuable to you in the future.
100%. Can you share one small way that a founder could, protect that data in that early stages, as you were mentioning?
I mean, a really basic one would be to back it up and keep it in multiple places. Like if you have something on Google Sheets, pull it off at a certain point in time and make a backup copy of it into Airtable. Even basic kind of business continuity or disaster recovery, stuff like that, it can be valuable in those early stages. You never know when something's going to get corrupted or a password breaks or whatever it might be. An employee with good intentions does something that results in data disappearing. Those things happen at companies of all sizes. So even something as simple as taking a copy and then understanding and defining the context in which you use data is a critical thing. So one I see all the time is active customers. So how many active customers do we have? And I think you often find as companies grow, you might suddenly get to this space where you are getting different answers from different departments. And the reason for that may be the data, but it may also be that each of ops and finance and marketing have got different reasons to measure that in a different way. So having a company-wide definition of what an active customer is can ensure that you're all talking the same language and you understand what you're saying when you define that term and use that term in conversation. Because as the company grows, you start to make pretty critical strategic decisions about what to do based on that number. And if everyone is walking around with a slightly different understanding of it, then again, you're bringing risk into play that you could have mitigated against by just putting that little bit of time and effort in up front to define what an active customer actually is in the context of your product or your platform.
That actually really does paint the picture. And I think a lot of our listeners will learn and take a lot from this conversation. And, once companies see that importance of data and how to manage it, how to protect it, how to make sure everyone understands, and they're talking the same language, as you were saying. The next big question is, how does data drive valuation? So how do you see data influencing company valuations in today's M&A landscapes?
Absolutely. I'd love to talk about this, and I spent a lot of time immersed in this particular subject in the course of the clients that we serve. People underestimate it. It's incredibly important that your data is of high quality and well governed, especially when you're approaching a liquidity event or a sale of your company, because often the headline price you might expect to get or the headline offer you might get from a buyer will be based on your EBITDA numbers, which are of course are derived from your revenue and your profitability, and all of the wonderful things that the accounting team do. But at the first touch of diligence, if it comes to light that your revenue number is different, as in the situations we described before, different across sales and marketing and operations, and it casts some doubt over what that revenue number truly is, then you start to run into valuation trouble. And let me tell you how that plays out. You'd think in an ideal world, in those acquisition scenarios, it would play out something like along the lines of, okay, we've got the buyer would say, okay, we have some confusion around the numbers. So take a month, go away, clarify everything. Let's understand what the correct number is and then come back. Often that's not what happens. Often what instead happens is the buyer says, there is clear data risk in this organization because they can't give me a good revenue number that they can stand behind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a multiple off the price to reflect the risk that I'm seeing in these numbers, and then we'll proceed that way. Or we'll just not buy at all. Right. So the consequences of it can be far reaching and catastrophic if your goal is to sell. And it's not just revenue, like profitability, lifetime value of customers, customer acquisition costs. Like, it is very important to buyers who come in and do diligence that the numbers you have got are well documented, are well governed, they make sense, and they add up with all the other numbers that you've got. If not, you start to run into this data risk arena where they will not wait for you to fix it. Instead, they will discount the price appropriately to reflect the amount of risk that they see in your data not being of sufficient quality.
So that ties back to what we were mentioning before, making sure everyone in the company has the same numbers. We're all looking at and understanding the data with the same definition of who's a customer, what's lifetime value for that customer. And also from what I'm hearing is, data is trust at the end. Data I'll be able to show that I'm trustful by giving you data and proving what I'm telling you,
And one of the other things that buyers will look out for in these scenarios is how quickly you can turn around. So if they say to
Mm-hmm.
say to you, let's have a cut of revenue split by this cohort of customers over this specific time period, and it then takes you a week to get that back, then that's going to cause some questions.
Yeah. Like why a week?
Why is that answer? Why are the systems not available? So either it suggests data risk or it suggests you're withholding something, which again
Mm-hmm.
is another threat to that trust that a buyer is trying to build in the credibility and the reliability of your company on the way in. You'll hear the phrase single source of truth used a lot. And people mistakenly think of this as, oh, we must have one platform where all of our data is aggregated. And there's a number of SaaS platforms out there that will do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
That is not necessarily the answer. Having all of your data in one place can be really confusing in terms of the story
Yeah.
that you're trying to tell, and trying to meet multiple human needs from one analytics dashboard is
Mm-hmm.
very rarely wise, because things start getting in the way of each other, and then you've got these complex views, and suddenly you find yourself with the dashboard with 12 windows, and you wonder why it exists and who it's actually for. And
Mm-hmm.
the user experience gets so bad that people suffer friction from trying to get to the insight that they're trying to get
Mm-hmm.
to. Rather, a single source of truth is, okay, if we do have our customer numbers, for example, like our active customer number, and it is calculated in different ways and in different places, like which one is the true one, right? And if we are going to use one for a strategic decision or a calculation, if it exists on 3 dashboards or even 3
Mm-hmm.
database tables or even 3 Excel spreadsheets, which one, when the rubber hits the road and we need to make a decision, which one do we all collectively agree that we're going to use?
Right.
So that's the kind of misnomer of single source of truth. It doesn't mean it all has to be in the one place. It just instead means that we all collectively agree for any given metric or part of the data where that single source of truth is.
I think that's gold right there, and a lot of founders will hopefully appreciate that. And are acquirers getting more sophisticated in how they measure data assets?
Yeah, absolutely. Traditionally in
Mm-hmm.
the acquisition space in private equity, you'll see roll-ups where firms will buy multiple types of the same company and then try and
Mm-hmm.
combine them into a collective to realize the operational efficiencies. Or you get the other approach where the firm sees a high potential company and comes in and either puts their own leadership team in, or forms a board to provide and dispense advice to
Mm-hmm.
to the current leadership team, and then leave them to get on with it. I think I'm seeing firms start to go that level deeper, start to utilize operating partners more, to go in and seek to understand and pull in consultancy and expertise to seek to understand what are many different ways that we could provide value generation for this company beyond the traditional methods that I just described to you. So
Mm-hmm.
it's an emerging space that I think will become more and more important as we continue into this world of back where we started with AI, where data within a company more and more becomes a moat and a competitive advantage. I think the importance of that being high
100%.
quality is only going to increase.
And what's the biggest misconception founders have about how investors or acquirers view their data?
I think it's the one that I covered of like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
if we find some gotchas, then we'll get some time to go back and understand and fix those. That time, based on my understanding and experiences, doesn't exist. And rather instead, the result will be a haircut in your valuation rather than an opportunity to go and address it. So that, I would say, is the biggest misconception. Where the bar is for investors is often very different to where the bar is for founders.
I see. And what's a simple first step around founders that can help them prep and make sure that everything is looking good before evaluation? Because evaluation doesn't come by surprise. Like right now,
No,
someone talks to me and he's like, "Yo, give me your data." It's more of a prepped sequence of events where someone reaches out, he's interested in knowing more about me, then asks for a pitch deck.
yeah.
So how does that, what first step would you recommend
So I'd say
for
turn
founders
the
and startups?
turn the requirement back on yourself, because there's far more to having good quality data than just maximizing evaluation.
Mhm.
The two are inexorably linked, but there is a reason why. Because good quality data enables you to make better strategic and tactical decisions. It enables you to
100%.
understand a clearer picture of how that company is doing. And as a founder, would you not want that yourself? So a great preparation activity for a founder would be the next time you're making a decision, as all CEOs have to do, of I have a limited set of resources. What are the biggest constraints in my company that I am going to apply these resources to? That should be a data-driven decision. That shouldn't be an instinct decision. That shouldn't be a this is this is what my head of operations told me decision, or this is what my head of sales told me decision. This should
Mhm.
be a data-driven decision based on your clear and detailed understanding of where the constraints are in your company. And if you haven't got good data, you're going to struggle to make those decisions. So I'd say look for the early warning signs and take care of the data and get it in order before it becomes a valuation consideration. If you're doing it in the run up to a liquidity event, it's probably too late.
Yeah, it's very powerful. And, beyond investors, public perception also shapes how data can be used. So, how are public attitudes toward data sharing evolving during the last decade?
Yeah, there's a clear generational demarcation around data, and Gen Z in particular is super interesting to me for a couple of reasons. Firstly, Gen Z is now very much a part of the workforce, a very active and
Hmm.
highly contributing element of the workforce. The jury's still out on Gen Alpha, and I also have two children, one from each of those generations. So it's interesting to me to understand their perceptions. So I've done a lot of
Hmm.
reading, and there's been a lot of research done about different attitudes to data across generations. Um, Something unsurprising about Gen Z, but then something surprising. So unsurprising, Gen Z is more comfortable sharing their data with people with companies whom they are doing business, platforms they're
Hmm.
members of, subscriptions they pay for, whatever it might be. But on the flip side, Gen Z, out of all the generations out there in the adult world, is more knowledgeable than any other generation about cybersecurity and the importance of protecting that data and it being used ethically. So Gen Z users, companies targeting that demographic, are more likely to be able to get data, but it comes with a contract of trust or an expectation of trust that will be used the right way and with good conscience and for the user benefit. So Gen Z will be happy in general to provide more data, but they have a much higher expectation in return of how
100%.
that data is then used to personalize their services, to make recommendations to them, to understand them better.
Hmm.
If all they get in return for that data is you sharing it with a bunch of third parties and then getting spammed with sales calls, they will whip it straight back off you as soon as they possibly can. And they're very aware of GDPR and
Hmm.
which is the data protection regulation in Europe, and then the California Consumer Privacy Act, which has had a lot of exposure in data circles, which grants users rights, including but not limited to the ability to go to people whose products and services they have been using and say, you must delete all the data about me, or you must provide me with all the data you hold about me, and delete it if I want you to. And Gen Z will not hesitate to act on that. Are more likely to act on that than other generations. So I anticipate that trend and pattern to continue, to a more data savvy audience
Hmm.
continuing to emerge into the world as both employees, employers, and consumers. So again, it all underlines data becoming more important, but not just data
100%.
itself, the proper care and governance and stewardship of that data once it's in your possession.
And do you think consumers are becoming more aware of the trade-off where convenience versus privacy?
I think so. And there's a kind of saddening trend that I'll also observe as someone who was around in corporate America in Fortune 500 companies when the first few big data breaches were happening. We remember
Hmm.
PlayStation and Equifax, to name but a couple, and what shocking events they were to the world and how much reaction there was, both from a legislative and a regulatory perspective. But so many have happened now that the general population has almost become a little numb to data breaches and cybersecurity events. And I think there's been a growing acceptance that those things are harder to avoid and that protections are in place. And all of the advancement in legislation like GDPR and CCPA, like I mentioned before, has actually increased the quality of the infrastructure so that things like identity theft, while very much still being a threat, the mechanisms are in place to resolve it far more easily than there used to be. It's going to be interesting to watch how that trend evolves. It doesn't get companies off the hook, by the way, for supplying appropriate protection for people's data. And, I have no doubt that if companies are careless with data and it gets into the wrong hands, that they will feel the full legislative and regulatory weight
Yeah.
of the industries in which they operate, as they should,
Mm-hmm.
as they should. But in the context of consumer attitudes, which is the context you asked me in, I think people are easing off and becoming more willing to be open with what they're sharing.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned something that we've talked about previously, and it's that uniqueness. What as a consumer, if I give that extra data to that company, as you mentioned, I'm expecting them to provide me better services, better products to what I want,
and to surprise and delight you. Think about when it becomes Spotify Wrapped season, and the huge success that Spotify had with Spotify Wrapped, and now all the copycats that are everywhere because of it. Here are the vitamins you ordered most from our vitamin site this year. Wow, that's so cool. But things like the Spotify Wrapped playlist, and even thinking personally, I just autosave them all. So I've now got favorite songs 22, 23, 24, 25, all in there. So that's a real good example of, I'm going to let you know everything I listen to, every second I listen to, what volume I listen to it at, what I'll do before and after it, what speed I listen to podcasts at, all of this stuff. And in return, you're going to give me gems like that I can save and then treasure forever. And if I want to revisit what the version of me in 2022 was listening to, I can go back and revisit my past at any time. And there's the value add. Of course, Spotify's getting way more value out of the data because with access to everybody's data about what they're listening to at the hundreds of millions of times the hundreds of millions of individuals they've got, they have such an incredibly unique data set about how human beings listen to music and interact with podcasts that none of their competitors can touch, because they have so many more. So I think Spotify has something in the region of 10x the amount of songs that Apple Music does, for example.
Wow.
So they have all of these songs, they have all of these users, they have years and years, they have playlists. And out of that, they have a very unique understanding about what drives human beings to listen to what things. That's incredibly valuable to them as a competitive advantage.
Yeah, that's very powerful. Now that you mentioned it, I was doing that earlier today. I was looking at my 2022 Wrapped, and I was like, what was I listening to? And it brought me back into like some funny memories, sad memories. And I mean, it was something so simple, but yet so powerful for them.
Yeah, they've used data to give you a unique human experience that's allowed you to emotionally travel in time. I mean, what about that for a value proposition?
And I mean, just shared one, but could you share another story where public perception directly impacted a company's strategy?
I mean, the cybersecurity breaches are a very obvious one to point to. And if you, again, we're not dealing with a specific company here, but the moves we've seen made towards multi-factor authentication, again, in the cybersecurity space, just to provide that double layer. Previously, if we go back, I don't know the right number of years to quote here, but if we go back a number of years, adding in multi-factor authentication to a login would be seen as a painful high friction thing that's going to turn users off and make them far less likely to register for and use their product. Now I think people feel uncomfortable if it's not there. So I think that shows, again, a shift in the attitudes to data that has affected many companies. And even, I think Google, like when I travel with work, and I'm trying to do something quickly, and I open my laptop in the airport, and it's like, no, we need you to re-sign in and do multi-factor authentication, because it knows it's somewhere like, oh, you're logging in from somewhere that you're not normally at. So now I'm going to make this more difficult for you. And you roll your eyes, but you accept that's part of the price of data being secure, even when you're in a rush and it slows you down. I think that's definitely changed over the last decade.
Now, when public trust shifts, corporate fears often surface. So let's talk about that. You've argued that many corporate concerns about AI adoption are somewhat exaggerated. Why do you think that is the case?
Yeah, as always, it depends on the use case. right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, pick any company. If you are putting personally identifiable information out there and feeding it into, say, for example, you're collecting a load of, let's just make a hypothetical company up. Just say we're
Mm-hmm.
doing biohacking, hustle bro, supplement recommendation platform, right? And we take in all this really important personally identifiable medical information about people, like blood type, blood pressure, resting heart rate, all of this stuff, which is very personal information. If you are just taking that information and then pumping it into public GPT and feeding it up onto the internet, connected with everyone, and then sharing it around inside your company, not taking good care of that data, that's terrible. That's absolutely terrible and shouldn't be done. And companies are correct to protect against that sort of thing. It's like using public non-closed private LLMs with your personal identifiable customer data is a terrible crime that should be punished. On the other hand, so companies are very risk averse, especially established larger companies with reputations to protect. Get to that size because they invest the time and effort in protecting their reputations. What they do is they take the broad brush and say, no one can use AI. Or yes, people can use AI, but you can only use Copilot because we're a Microsoft shop, and you can only use it in these very specific, limited ways.
Mm-hmm.
The exception case that I always point to is marketing activity. So, if you say to your large Fortune 500 company marketing department, you can't use AI to create marketing copy. You can't use AI to create images that we use in marketing. Then all you're doing is putting them at a significant disadvantage. And always you have to measure the upside with the downside.
Mm-hmm.
So say I'm at a marketing team at a large corporation. I'm trying to paint that company in the best possible light. I'm going to talk about all the values, all the value and all the benefits that come from the users to the users who pay for my product. Now, if I take all of that and then get in a series of long and deep conversations, even with the public free version of ChatGPT, then if you think about it from a common sense perspective on behalf of that company, you're banning them from doing that because you're concerned that information will be worked back into the model. And yet, the information the marketing team is using is information all about how great your product is, all the value it brings, and all the benefit it brings. Like, wouldn't you, and this is the challenge question I put out there, wouldn't you want that to be wouldn't you want GPT to consume that into its model? In fact, agencies exist for that very purpose, to try and get GPT to consume that stuff so it then spits it back out later on. So as always with data, there's never a precise and correct answer that should be applied across all types of data. So sure, company finances, absolutely, you should be really careful and well-governed about how you use AI with that. Customer information, same thing. Marketing, completely different answer because you're dealing with different data that should be governed differently with a different level of protection around it. And in fact, by putting that blocker in place, you're actually harming rather than helping your company. So information and decisions around how data is governed, who has access to it, what it is used and not used for, are critical, because I think if that's properly consulted and implemented, it then gives you a very different answer depending on the question that's being asked and the data that's being shared.
100%. And what do you think are the real risks versus some imagined ones when it comes to using and combining AI and data?
Yeah, I think I covered the real risks. Like if you're using personally identifiable customer information, there are real risks that it does end up out there. And I think we saw a little flurry of concern 3 months or so back when GPT conversations that people had then pressed the share link to send to somebody else were available and indexed and searchable on Google. I think that was a very clear indication there was all sorts of very personal information out there that people had shared. So that's the risk for sure. The benefit, again, I think I already covered. The benefit is AI is only going off of the data set that it's got. If you are in conversation with it and you have an opportunity to add to that data set and do so in a way that's beneficial to your company and talks about all the positive elements of your company or your product or your service, then you should absolutely take that opportunity.
And if you are in a boardroom with a hesitant executives or board of directors, what's the one thing you'd tell them?
Yeah, I'd say rather than seeking a yes or no answer or a definitive answer, look for the different shades of it depends, and give your employees and your staff clear definition of it depends, number one. And then number two, if I might add a second one on, is let people play and help educate them. Like one of the other mistakes I've seen big companies make with AI is they roll it out. They decide, in the opposite to what I've just advised, they decide that their broad brush answer is like, people can use Copilot.
Mhm.
So they give everyone access to Copilot, but they don't help anyone understand how to use it, what it's good for, what it's bad at, how to prompt it, how to be most effective with it, some good use cases internally. They don't establish a center of excellence within the company to share best practice and use
Best
case
practice.
examples. They just like cut people loose and say, good luck. Because what happens with most people, I find, especially the people who haven't adopted AI yet, is that they will go up to it. They will ask it a very specific question in such the way that they would ask, in the similar way that they would ask Google a very specific question. And then, as you and I both know, Yohan, AI is not intended to be a replacement for Google. Many
Mhm.
people treat it as if it's an encyclopedia of every fact that's ever existed. And when you apply that test to it and say, like, my name is Yohan, tell me about me, and then it gets something wrong because there's lots of people called Yohan. You then, and I've seen this happen with loads of users. Oh, I asked it this really specific question and it got it wrong. Therefore, I don't trust anything that it does, and I'm not going to use it anymore. That happens more often than you would think, especially during those mass Copilot rollouts. People give it one task without the proper instruction or the context about what it's good for. It fails that one task, or it doesn't complete that one task in the way they might expect, and then they just write the whole thing off.
Yeah, it's really powerful right there. And I mean, prompting, people don't realize how difficult writing a prompt is. And that's where I think most of us get it wrong. Because as you mentioned, and I've talked to a lot of people
People
like
are
that.
pe- people are getting better at the core elements of prompting. I'd love to hear yours as well, but giving the AI a role, setting expectations about
Exactly.
the output you're expecting, the format you want that output in, helping it understand the context and background of the problem, giving it appropriate data to work with, and telling it the importance of that data on the way in. Suddenly, you're into a pretty extensive prompt, even for a simple task. But you need to remember that AI knows nothing going in about your specific situation unless you tell it.
That's kind of like where we try to attack. We try to do a very extensive prompt for anything that we do. Lately, during the past couple of months, we've tried to give it a persona, like you mentioned, like a role. So you're
Yep,
a marketing expert. You have plenty of years of experience in this field, and you've had expertise in consumer behavior for shoes and supplements. And then that's where
absolutely.
we're
Yeah.
right to prompt. And I think that's where people get lost with AI. So, I mean, thank you for sharing that perspective. Very powerful. Now, let's zoom out to that bigger picture and let's look forward into the next 3 to 5 years. What do you think will separate companies that thrive with data from those that struggle?
That the quality and the extent of that data is going to become, as well as a couple of things are going to become the key moats for competitive
Mhm.
advantage. One of them is distribution and trust, and the other is quality of first party unique data that you have that the rest of the world does not have. Data has been increasingly democratized. Access to AI models has obviously been democratized. So where is the competitive advantage going to come from? And it's those two areas. It's the trust that your consumers have in you, the distribution
Mhm.
you have, the number of people you can reach with your message, and the quality of the data that you back that up with.
And what's one leadership lesson you've learned about adapting new technologies in complex or heavily regulated environments?
The having done all of those things, the regardless of how heavy the regulation, regardless of how complex or advanced or brand new the technology is, the human beings are always the hardest bit. And I always say this to my clients and remind my team of this all the time, that the change management work that
Mhm.
you're about to undergo to get people aware of the change that you're doing, bought into the vision of the change, so that they're on the side and they understand why they're doing it, and then equipping them with the right knowledge they need to transition and the right support and training they need to move across to whatever new technology you're implementing, be it AI or a different type of data or whatever it might be. Supporting the human beings, or the humans in the loop, as they're now called, along the way, and making sure that that transition is done thoughtfully with enough time planned in for the human elements of it to adjust, are critical.
That's a gold, and a lot of people will, not only leaders or founders, but a lot of people will really appreciate that. And I know we've covered this question before, but if you had any other advice for a startup What's that one big, very important advice about data you'd give them?
Yeah, think about it in advance, define your terms, and come up with a strategy to collect and store in a way that's understood by everyone who's involved in your company.
Beautiful. And that's a great setup for our quick lightning round. So we'll go over some 4 questions. And the first one is most overrated buzzword in AI right now.
It's the I'll go for a multiple choice answer here, and it's the GEO, AI, SEO, whatever. As all of these people out there claiming to be able to advance your position in AI search results, when none of them know the algorithms and no one actually knows how to do it. That one.
Yeah, I've seen some of those on LinkedIn lately. And most underrated source of data value.
Yeah, clearly defining terms in a way that everyone agrees. I think people are quick to assume that everyone would define a same column or a calculation or a number the same way that they would, testing their assumptions on that and making sure that everyone agrees that we're all calling the apples in the same way is a really valuable and quick thing to do, particularly when you're building your data infrastructure. As the same as software engineering, the further a problem spreads and the longer in the process it is before that problem or bug is addressed, the more expensive and time consuming it is to fix it. So think about it up front.
One behavior you wish leaders would stop around AI.
Thinking that AI is the silver bullet that is going to fix all their problems, including foundational data issues, and also doing AI just to describe themselves or their companies as AI driven is really kind of tired for me and very kind of see-through. If you're doing AI for the sake of public relations, there are probably better ways you can spend your money.
And one book, podcast, or resource you'd recommend to first-time founders?
Other than this podcast, there's a few. I know I couldn't stop at just one. Certainly from so I'll go for 2 books. 4 Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss is, I think, a must read for any entrepreneur.
100%.
An absolute classic. More broadly than that, I have it up here actually. Principles by Ray Dalio. Not so much about entrepreneurship or startup, but more about humans and building value and building relationships. So those 2 books. Podcast, I'll go for 2. I'll go for Greg Eisenberg's Startup Ideas podcast. Fabulous. I'm lucky enough to have spoken with Greg and a couple of his team, and there's real experience and success behind what they're sharing. So it's rare insight to get, and you can never go wrong with Hormozi. Yeah. I think the game, all the back episodes of the game, all the Q&A that he does on the game with real business owners, I think contains gold that's applicable in lots of different ways. So 2 books and 2 podcasts there.
Beautiful. I really appreciate it. And I just read the 4 Hour Workweek a couple months back. And it's one of those few books that I've read and wanted to read again once I finished it.
I don't know about you, Yohan, but I still haven't cracked this checking email 2 times a day. I know what a good productivity boost it will be. I know how much it would provide additional mental clarity, but I somehow still have not been able to get past the hurdle of doing it. I'm sitting here with my email inbox in front of me right now. So sorry, Tim Ferriss, I'm working on it.
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the hardest things. What I've done is I did remove email notifications on my phone.
Same. I don't have email notifications at all. Yeah. So I have to actively seek them out, but I probably actively open my inbox more often than I care to admit.
Yeah, same here. So, I mean, that's what we had for today. We got 2 big takeaways from today's conversation. And the first was data is the foundation, not the byproduct. Companies already sit on hidden assets that they can unlock. And the second one is perception really matters. From investors to consumers, the way data is valued and trusted can make or break outcomes. Graeme's perspectives shows that leaders who embrace data pragmatically, not fearfully, are the ones building real lasting value. Graeme, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for unpacking how data underpins both AI and business value. For everyone listening, check out crawfordmcmillan.com and to learn more about Graeme's work. We'll link everything in the show notes. And to our audience, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with a colleague who's thinking about data strategy. And Graeme, thank you again. I'm excited to see how you continue shaping this space.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.